Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. My name is PJ Beninati. I'm a Baltimore resident and the interim chair of the Maryland Forward Party. For those of you unfamiliar with our organization, Forward is a new and quickly growing political party. Our slogan is not left, not right, forward. We're structurally different from the two major parties in that we intentionally don't have a top-down policy platform. Instead, we provide flexibility to our candidates and elected officials to align themselves freely on individual issues. This means that depending on the specific issue, they will have freedom and autonomy to lean liberally, moderately, or conservatively, depending on the issue. We believe that this more nuanced form of representation is better suited to meeting the needs of our communities, which are growing more diverse and more complex. Because we are focused on a bottom-up approach, we also believe in prioritizing local and state issues. We also acknowledge that we will not always be the experts in these local issues, and that brings us here tonight. The Maryland Forward Party is hosting 6 local experts to discuss Question H. This is a ballot measure that Baltimore residents will see as together we vote this fall in the general election. The proposal is to reduce the size of the Baltimore City Council from 14 members plus a city council president down to 8. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists. Zac Blanchard is a Democratic nominee for Baltimore's 11th district, which covers downtown and the surrounding area. Zac is the first publicly financed candidate to ever win an election in Baltimore City. Residing in West Baltimore, Jovani Patterson is chairman of People for Elected Accountability and Civic Engagement, PEACE, whose aim is to return power back to the people. Lois Hybl is a member of the League of Women Voters. She is a longtime advocate for equitable public education and has lived in Baltimore for over 60 years. Evie Harris is a former member of Baltimore City Board of Elections. She's a past community association president and born and raised in Baltimore. She wants Baltimore's government to be more efficient in delivering the services that taxpayers have a right to expect. Ellis is a member of the Green Party and was on the 2023-2024 Baltimore City Charter Commission. He's also the chair of Baltimore for Democracy, a ballot issue committee opposing Question H. Grandpre is director of research for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, also known as LBS, a grassroots think tank advancing the public policy interests of Black communities in Baltimore and Maryland. The format for tonight's panel discussion is different from most traditional panels and debates. Tonight, we will not be focusing on solutions. To better understand the nuanced details regarding the size of City Council, we need to first step back and understand the potential problems associated with this topic. We'll be identifying and then prioritizing these issues so that we can start targeting the right problems with focused solutions. To lead us through this process tonight will be Pete Oliver Kruger. Pete is a board member with the Maryland Forward Party and the head of our Priorities Committee. He lives in Prince George's County, where he works as an entrepreneur and organizational leadership coach. It's my pleasure to now turn it over to Pete, who can guide us through the panel discussion format.
Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to have you here. So as PJ was saying, this is a different form of debate. You may have seen some of the traditional styles before, where we put up different panelists or different speakers and they get to talk for a certain amount of time, and also a valid form of debate, but this one's probably not going to look like that. We have discovered in a lot of discussions that we've had that people sometimes will agree or disagree on the solutions and how we want to solve problems. But when we talk about what problems are we trying to solve, we start to find common ground. And we start to find places where we actually overlap. And we all want to solve very similar problems. We just want to solve them in different ways. So this debate format here is designed around bringing out a different way of doing debate that gets us focused back on the problems we're trying to solve and how well are we solving those problems. It's also something that helps us to bring about more voices so that we can start to hear more diverse, different solutions and pick the best one for the situation. And there's another piece here, which is that when we try to solve one problem at a time, oftentimes we can make other problems worse, or we can create brand new problems in trying to solve the original problem. So the other thing you'll see about this format is you're going to see all of the problems at once, so that we're thinking about all the problems that we have to solve and how they might be affected by the solutions that we choose. So the format for this is basically 3 steps. There is going to be a proposal of a problem statement. Then there's going to be a series of debate about that problem statement. And then we're going to have a vote. And then we're going to go on to the next panelist is going to present their problem statement. Then we'll have a debate about that problem statement. And then we'll have a vote. And we'll go on to the third one and the fourth one until we go through all 6. So to fit us everything into the time here, we are limiting the debate time until about 10 minutes for each of the different problem statements. But one of the things you're going to see here is that you're going to get to come back to these problem statements multiple times, because what we're going to do is we are going to look at how the problems compare against each other. I'm going to draw your attention down to the one down here at the bottom, rule number 3. And this is the format that drives the discussion of this debate. When we put the problems in order, and we talk about that idea of we don't want to make other problems worse when solving problems, or we don't want to create new problems. Sometimes we can't solve all the problems at once, and knowing which problems are higher priority than other problems and which problems might need to take a back seat because we're trying to solve a more important problem can make all the difference in the world. So our rule for prioritized problems debate is do not make a higher order problem worse when solving a lower order problem. So our panelists are not only going to present the problems that they see, either that could be solved by the question H or the amendment, or that that might be caused by the amendment if it were to go into effect. But they will also say that compared to the other problems on the list, I think this problem is more important than that one or less important than another problem. And then we're going to have that discussion back and forth. Everybody gets 30 seconds so that we get to hear from more voices. It may sound pretty fast, but we found there's a lot that really can get through in 30 seconds. If there is a question that comes up or that requires a response from the initial panelist, we will take 30 seconds for that panelist to be able to respond to that question. So let's see. Last thing I'll say is there's typically 4 types of debate here that we find, is people often want to ask a question of the panelist and get an answer for that. They might have a different suggested wording to the phrasing and say, you know, I could get behind it better if it was worded this way, or it was rephrased this way. So that would be a suggestion of an edit. Now that is totally up to the panelists to decide whether or not they wish to adopt that change. And so you'll see that we'll ask that person, and if they accept it, we'll make the edit. And if they don't want to accept it, totally their prerogative. And then we'll move on to the next step there. And you can also spend, a typical, comment about debate for or debate against. As we get into this, you'll start to see how this goes. The first time through, that gets to be, people are sort of feeling things through and figuring out how it goes. And then we'll start to hit a rhythm and you'll start to see how this stuff goes. So we're really excited to introduce this technique to more people and see what you all think of this. The prompt question for this debate, we have our question H for the purpose of amending the articles to reduce the number of the seats on the city council from 14 to 8. And the question for our panelists was what problems are solved by reducing the size of the city council, or what problems will be made worse by reducing the size of the city council? And so they had the option to choose either question to respond to. So we just used an online random generator and we shuffled them up. So randomly ordered, the first one that we have on our list came from our panelist, Evie. When the cost of the council is disproportionate to the constituents, there is no incentive for the council to work as part-time council members, as was the original intent, which removes council members from real life, real day-to-day experiences of constituents and the consequences of policies, bureaucracies that they impose on constituents. Question number 2, or problem number 2 here, is the question H would give constituents less of a voice and give money more of a voice in the city's process of making laws and spending money. Number 3, people in the diverse communities in Baltimore City may not get the help that they need from their councilperson and the city government to solve their problems. Problem number 4, the city has insufficient infrastructure and resources for democratic participation and civic engagement. This is a problem that exists now and maybe worse if question H passes. With Baltimore's population steadily declining, the cost of the city council and taxpayer dollars is way out of balance when compared to delivering the results our city desperately needs. And number 6 problem statement is question H further concentrates power in the hands of donors and wealthy, higher turnout communities, further diluting the grassroots community access to power. And so I was talking about before how we don't want to make a higher order problem worse when solving a lower order problem. So these problems are now going to move up and down the page based on the debates that we have, and they might change and they might get edited. And the proposals for each person is going to basically say, I believe this should move up for these reasons. I believe that should move down for these reasons. All right, so we're going to find out more about these statements, and we're going to go in reverse order. So we are going to start with Lawrence, and then we're going to work our way back up to the top of the list. So Lawrence, I'm going to bring you up to the spotlight, and I'll go back to your slide, and you can give us an introduction to your problem statement, and then we will open up for debate.
Good evening, Lawrence Grandpre. I think that democracy only works when the working class people have the power to actually engage governance. I think it's clear that question H dilutes that power. These districts will be bigger. It costs more money to run in bigger districts. They're less likely to be able not just to talk to their council person, but for their networks. Everyday working class people have networks that can influence political outcomes at the city council level because the results are determined by relatively few amounts of voters. Bigger districts lessen that power, which means they only have to be responsive to higher turnout communities, which tend to be wealthier communities. The problems that have gotten solved in this city are when working class people have influenced policy to reflect their desires. My example is the murder rate. We were telling Baltimore City to invest in grassroots community responses to violence for decades, but they continue to prioritize not just police, but the forms of quote unquote public health violence intervention that were favored by Hopkins and nonprofit elites. When these failed over and over again, we demanded investment in grassroots violence prevention options, and that is what decreased the murder rate over the past 5 years. These are the types of interventions, and I really believe that as a group beyond the left-right binary, many people on the left and the right agree that when elites are empowered to do policymaking, they reflect their own biases, their own limitations of what they think fixes the problem. And working class people do not see what we know works reflected in that policy. So we think that that's a prime example of why question H will concentrate power in the hands of high turnout communities and wealthy elites. People are going to talk about saving money. People are going to talk about responsive governance. The only responsive governance is governance you have the power as a regular person to leverage electoral consequences on people when they do not respond to your needs. That is the metric by which any of the other criteria that will be presented tonight should be evaluated. And by that metric, I believe question H fails. And this is the best way to interpret how we should understand the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. So basically, we don't want to make a higher order problem worse when it comes to solving a lower order problem. So if you look at your problem statement, and you say that I think this problem is a higher priority than one of the other problems in here. So you can put it in position 1, 2, or 3. Like if you like Evie's and you're like, I don't want to make Evie's problem worse, so I'm going to put it in position 2. That's your choice. What position would you like to go for?
I would say that given what I just said, this is a nexus to determine how we interpret how to solve the other problems. So I guess that makes it first. But like I said last night, many of our wordings are very similar in terms of democratic responsiveness. So Zac's being that high, I think is fine. But I guess it's first. I'm not really sure.
All right, we're going to do first. Thank you for going first. All right, Jovani, 30 seconds.
So I can ask a question, right? Or so what do I do? Just make sure I'm clear.
Yes, you can ask a question. You can offer a alternative wording for the problem statement here, or you can offer a point of debate either for positioning this as the most important question or against positioning this as the most important, saying maybe you want to move this further down the list.
I guess I would yeah, I would move it further down, but the thing is that there was already a concentration of power in city government now in the hands of donors in higher turnout communities. So this isn't um it's especially when you look at the primary, there's only like a lot of our council members get elected by just a small base, which is the election in Baltimore City for the most part. So yeah, man, that's my time. But yeah.
All right, Andy, you're up next. 30 seconds.
Yeah, I want to argue in favor of Lawrence's framing of this, and I think to answer Jovani's point, he acts as if his proposal that he's supporting and worked with David Smith's money to get on the ballot cannot make things worse, but it will make things worse. It will make that concentration of power worse, and it will make the donor influence worse. And I think throughout the debate tonight, we will understand that it is possible to make things worse. There are two types of reforms. There are realigning reforms, and there are insulating reforms. And the one that Jovani worked so hard with David Smith's money to get on the ballot is an insulating reform.
All right, thank you, Andy. Up next is Lois.
Yeah, I agree that belongs high priority. Let's see. I know that having a smaller district makes it easier for people who don't have a lot of money to run. So I would agree that it's a high priority.
All right, thank you. Zac, you're up next.
Yeah, love it. Definitely a high priority. I think I would suggest that maybe we reword it to make it more clear that the concern is, I think Lawrence had a line about concentrating the power in the amongst elites and against the working class. I think maybe using those two as like forefront of the point would maybe better clarify it and distinguish it from, say, my point, which is talking about just constituents in general. So that would be my recommendation.
All right, Lawrence, would you like to make an edit based on Zac's suggestion?
So let me try to pinpoint what he's saying. So forefronting the elite in terms of who would the power be in the hands of. I mean, I'm fine. I'm not committed to this wording at all. I'm just trying to figure out what wording people think would be more precise or more clear.
Do you want to clarify real quick, Zac? What would you change?
Confusing. Lawrence gave me a second to think through that one. Question H, I think further concentrates power amongst elites and further removes it from the working class. Might be a more clear way to distinguish it from, say, the point that I'm going to try to make.
Okay, I think that's fine.
All right. Next up is Evie.
Yes, thanks. So if I understand Lawrence's argument, I would offer a counter argument if that's what we can do. I'm not sure. But because there are 3 members per district now, having fewer members per district would basically, I would say, force council members to have to respond to a more diverse representation of constituents instead of having the option now to choose who they want to respond to or not.
All right, so we have given a response to our panelists first. Now the floor is open. Anybody in the Zoom may now raise your hand and you may ask a question. You likewise get 30 seconds. You can ask a question, you can make a suggestion just like Zac did, or you can make a point, in favor of this problem statement or maybe moving this down. And I see Jay has his hand raised. Go for it, Jay.
Hi, thank you for the floor. So, Baltimore City is not doing well. We've had the structure we've had for a while. We're losing population. Our crime rate is very high, even though it went down with the change in the state's attorney. And I'm glad to see that happen. And COVID helped a little bit, but we still have high crime. So in my mind, keeping the infrastructure designed for 1 million people designed for a populace that is now 590,000 people. I'm not sure what the exact number is. Makes no sense. In my mind, when you get to a certain point, you're doing things, you're going in the wrong direction, and you don't turn around, you're going to get where you're headed. That is my theory on this, and that we need to change, not use these people to actually make the city work, but change how the city works so we don't need so many people to step in. I've worked as an advisory for hospitals and things like that, and I've seen the same
All right,
type of
Jay,
thing.
we're up to about a minute now at this point.
All right, thanks.
So, but there's no other hands up, so you could go again. But does anybody else want to put a hand up?
Yeah, Annie's making the point, but just to clarify, or to respond to Jay, the last time we reduced the size of the council, we were at about 641,000 people. So if we were to keep that proportional number of constituents to representatives, we'd be looking at 12 districts instead of 8 districts. So I think that's an important distinction to make there.
As it relates to the number of districts compared to other cities and states and municipalities, we have a relatively high number of delegates.
Can I chime in on that point?
You certainly may. And everybody, please use your raised hands feature. Thank you. Go for it.
So Milwaukee has a lower constituent per council person rate than us. Same with Atlanta, same with Louisville, same with Nashville. Tucson has a much higher. And I lived in Tucson. I have a friend in Tucson. I don't want to live in Tucson. We are a fundamentally different city. And the reality is we still have much of the infrastructure, abandoned homes, pipes, infrastructure from being a 1 million person city. Why would it make sense, given that when your city is struggling, you need more attention to things like those abandoned homes, to those pipes? Rather, you want more attention to that rather than less. So understandable people's frustration with the direction of the city. The question is, what is the actual linkage between changing the structure of the city governance as it has been presented to addressing that problem versus making it worse? I haven't heard a compelling argument as to why a structure that will concentrate more power in higher resource, higher turnout communities will improve the conditions of blight and lack of attention to struggling communities that people cite as the reason why they move.
All right. Thank you so much. I just got notice from our timekeeper, Adam, there that we have reached our 10 minutes for the first one. Now we are going to position other problem statements around this. We're going to have more chances to talk about this problem statement. So PJ is going to put up a vote. It's going to be a multiple choice vote because we like to use ranked choice voting. And so if you like having this problem statement as position number 1, you can vote for number 1. If you would be great in having this problem statement at any position in the order, you could vote for all 6 positions. But basically vote for where you think this should be, and you can vote for multiple different spots. All right, and here is the results of the poll. And so position 1 got the most number of votes, so that is going to stay in position 1. Thank you, everybody, for voting. All right, and thank you, Lawrence. Now we are up next is going to be Jovani. Put Jovani up there. Fantastic. If you don't mind, Jovani, I think I'll just stay here on this screen. And so yours is down here. So go ahead and you have your 2 minutes to introduce your problem statement, and then tell me where you want to put it in the list. Do you want to have it at number 1 and number 2, or 3, 4, 5, wherever you wish to have it?
Good evening, everybody, and thank you guys for having this forum and discussion. Again, with Baltimore's population steady declining, the cost of city council in taxpayer dollars is way out of balance, especially when compared to delivering the results our city desperately needs. There's one thing I'll often encourage people to look at, and that is our city charter and our city budget. By definition, Baltimore City is a corporation. The inhabitants of the city of Baltimore are a corporation. And there's no corporation that maintains its same structure and size as it begins to, as its support, as its base, as its funding source is declining. So I believe there needs to be a restructure there. And as we consider that it is the taxpayer and it's the burden on the taxpayer that continues to fund, a government that is seemingly not providing services and being efficient for the city of Baltimore, we do have to question the power structure and call into question the power structure that exists in Baltimore City. And when you compare it to our neighbors all surrounding Baltimore, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, they're able to offer effective services and deliver it with much less overhead, council people, and administrative burden. So again, my position is to return power back to the people. It is your dollars that are being spent on government, and I believe more money belongs back into the pocket of everyday working class folks, that want to take care of their family, and also that much of that money can be, government money from a government perspective can be redirected into the things that some of our other people are really talking about: infrastructure, crime fighting strategies, public education. And I'll end with this. Our city council has rebranded themselves as constituent services managers when these things actually fall under the mayor's office. So the question then becomes, why doesn't our city council really hold the mayor's office accountable when it's not delivering on the city services that people actually need?
What position would you like to have your statement to be?
Because it's people's money, and because I think people can do the better with their money, I believe it's number one. That should be a priority.
All right, we're moving up to number one. That's open up the floor for debate. Andy, you are up first.
Yeah, so I've been all around the city talking about this question over the last year, and one of the things that I've heard not a single person say is, how many council people does Anne Arundel County have? They don't care. They want to make sure that city services are delivered well to them. This does not improve the delivery of city services, and it saves a little bit of money. It would be great if, it was an actual proposal to restructure the government, but it is simply a proposal to decrease the number of people we have representing us as constituents in order to work with the government. It doesn't shrink the size of the government, and it barely shrinks the budget, and nobody cares what Anne Arundel County's council size is.
All right, up next is Lois.
I just would like to ask if you could tell how much would you think you would save with this reduction? Would a smaller number of councilmen require more staff? Would they be expected to get along with the same number?
Well, I do think we can, there may be a slight increase in staff just, because the districts will increase. However, from things like travel, pensions, additional salaries, it's a multi-million-dollar a year savings.
I just wondered how many million.
So I don't know the exact number of millions, but hey, if I come to your house and ask you for $3, $5 every day, does that matter to you? And that's exactly what our government is doing from the citizens. And I believe it's time we have to take our power back.
All right, Zac, you're up next.
I certainly respect the concern for taxpayer dollars. I do want to clarify that it's about $2.4 million is what we would save, which is 0.05% of our city's annual budget, or about 1/2000th of our annual budget. So I'm going to argue against the relevance of this as a solution because it's such a small piece of a solution to a financial problem.
All right, we're going to go to Evie next, and then we'll go to Lawrence.
Yes, thanks. I did misspeak earlier. I was thinking something else, but there are 14-member districts as 14 members that we have right now. I do want to correct that. But number two, I do support Jovani's argument, because I, as a taxpayer, every cent that the city council collects is taxpayer money. The city council produces nothing in and of itself to earn, if you will, or to make a profit on its own accord. So any cents or any millions of dollars that are saved every year, I welcome that.
All right, Lawrence.
Yeah, so I agree with Zac. This police budget alone is $600 million. I don't understand why we should cut the council for something that wouldn't even run the police department for 4 days. I also believe that no one wants to speak to a staffer for a council person. The way things move in the city is you have to not just have proximity to a council person, you have to be able to touch them or hurt them in a primary to get something done. So in that world, it is absolutely essential that we keep that money. It's a good investment. We manage billions of dollars flowing from the state and the feds in the city. Having those council people there where we can touch them and hurt them if needed is a good investment.
Thank you, Lawrence. All right, the floor is now open to anybody who wishes to ask a question or make a statement or offer a suggestion.
Right. Oh, can I go?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to make I guess a suggestion. A number of the comments seem to center around taxpayer money not being important, or that it's only X amount or 0.5% of the city council budget. Again, I'm going to reiterate my earlier point was that every cent that taxpayers don't have on their own accord that is taken from us means less power, less control that we have to really solve our own problems.
All right, Zach's got the hand up next.
Thanks, guys. I would suggest maybe rewording the question to focus it more explicitly on something like the financial position of the city, of the municipality, should be prioritized over, democratic concerns.
So
Can
this is
you-
up to you, Jovani, if you want
yeah.
to adjust or incorporate any of these changes.
I guess I'm trying to understand that because I think that when you're saying democratic concerns are less of priority, I think that's an incorrect statement. Democratic concerns are, critically important in this, but also it is to remind us that it is the people that are in control of the government, not the government in control of the people. And so I kind of reject the financial versus democratic. I think they're still equal.
All right, so we're taking that off. Andy was next, and then Jay.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that this proposal does not decrease your taxes. It does not decrease the city budget. It does not decrease the fees you pay. It just makes fewer people have control over how that budget is allocated for city resources. And those are people more likely to be elected with big money donors and high turnout districts.
So let me add to that because I mean you're correct. It does not directly reduce taxes. However, high taxation is a problem that people have been concerned about but seemingly ignored. So I do believe having a larger per constituency, so you have more eyes on each council member, and each council member now saying, "Hey, this is a real problem. This is what people really need." I do think you do get towards a government that does reduce the burden on every taxpayer.
All right, Jay, you're up next.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I can concur on that the property taxes in the city are double the surrounding communities. That's number one. These are expenses that don't need to be the case. And the concept around, constituent services are simply because the organization of the city itself is not working properly. So what we're doing by creating all the constituent service, regional constituent services, we're actually creating a disadvantage for the state. We're saying we're going to allow you to be inefficient and improperly operate as a city by surrounding you with individual resources and localized positions that are just going to negotiate their way to find constituent services. That's what's called buffering, and it's a bad way to operate a business.
All right, Evie is up next, then Lawrence.
Yes, I wanted to ask a clarifying point, make a clarifying point about the democracy versus the financial. As we have heard several times already from many of the panelists about how the power has been concentrated in certain elite groups and that they have the funding. Well, in my thinking, from a regular everyday person, why not give that funding, if you will, back to the people to have that power over their own lives and to have more direct access to their city council representatives?
Okay, Lawrence.
Respectfully, Evie, I don't understand how shrinking the council is the actual link to get that. Let's say we did want a grand bargain on taxes. We wanted to do some tips for local development, increase housing ownership, deal with some of the tax breaks to big developers. Which arrangement as a council is more conducive to that deal? One with bigger districts where you need to take more money from big donors and corporate donors, or the current setup where you at least have some working class people have the juice to be able to get that grand bargain? We're talking about billions and billions of dollars of revenue we have to raise. I don't understand why cutting a couple million by getting rid of city council people is the key to get that.
Well, I do think you refocus the council on actually doing their jobs. Again, they've rebranded themselves as constituent services experts. We need them to legislate and bring those resources back to our districts and address of our community. So again, there's no corporation that maintains its same size as its funding sources diminish. And I think this is, just pure, again, Baltimore is a corporation and it's a pure fiscal sense. We need to get back on track. We need our council members refocused. And, part of that is, they're asking more and more money from us, and we should demand more from from them.
All right, Adam.
I say, yeah, with that, that is the 10 minutes for debate on problem 2.
All right, so we are now going to have the votes for problem statement number 2 for Jovani's problem statement here. So the position that you are going to vote for is going to say where you think this should go. So you're going to put down a 1 if you think that the cost of the city council is a larger problem than the Lawrence's statement about elites and the working class, or you can put it down in a level, down at 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, whichever number you want to do, and vote that into the listing in the problem statements. Here's the results. It was interesting that way. It goes back and forth between a 1 and a 6. But 6 has a few more votes, so we're going to put this back down into position 6. And we will get ready for Andy will be next.
All right. Okay, so I want to start off by, in agreement with this format. There's some things I agree with. There's a lot that is not working in the city right now. There's a lot that feels like the priorities are wrong, feels like the elites have too much control, feels like the developers are getting too much of our money, and the neighborhoods that we all live in are getting too little of it. It does feel like our council people have been turned into constituent services people and not into legislators. And it does feel like they're not often responsive to those of us who don't have immediate access to them or don't have money to contribute to their campaigns. But I think it's a good thing that this forum is not about solutions, because there isn't a solution on the ballot this year to those problems. We need to strengthen the democratic muscles we have in this city. We need to strengthen the ability of people to hold electeds accountable. And I don't mean accountable on some Fox 45, stick a mic in your face and demand that you answer a question on the spot. I mean people showing up at their councilperson's office and demanding that they do different things. That is the political tradition that has allowed Baltimore City to get through some very, very difficult times, is when people and communities that are affected by problems can band together and go to their council, and they can say, you are going to lose if you don't solve this problem. We have lost some of that ability over the last couple of decades, though since maybe 2016, we started to gain some of it back. In order to solve any of the problems that are identified as reasons to cut the city council, we first need to strengthen those democratic muscles so that if we were to have more eyes on each council person, we would have more ability to use those democratic muscles in order to get them to do what they want to do. Absent that, we only make the problems that Jovani and Evie are identifying worse. We only make those problems worse. And if we don't strengthen those democratic muscles first, then we're going to even have worse situations when the power gets even more consolidated in a few Democrats and their developers and donors.
All right, Andy, what position would you like to put yours in? Do you think the problem of democratic participation, civic engagement goes above Lawrence's one about elites versus the working class, or below that, or further down in the list, maybe under Evie's or Zac's?
Well, I think it's, I think it's probably below Lawrence's. I think it's above Evie's, but I ultimately think it's in position 3, but I guess we'll handle that through the rounds. So go ahead and put me in 2 for right now.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so first up is Lois.
Okay, I guess do you feel that it would be easier to get people exercising their power if the districts are smaller.
Yeah, absolutely. I think smaller districts are absolutely easier to exercise the power, and we got to redevelop those muscles that Baltimore has had for so long about exercising that power before we would even think about a solution with more eyes somehow working.
All right, next up is Zac, and then it'll be Evie.
Your line at the beginning about a realigning reform versus an insulating reform, I think was spot on. And I really struggle to understand how you could even frame question H as anything but an insulating reform, given how money works in politics in this country.
I agree entirely.
Okay, Evie, you're up next, and then Lawrence.
Yes, first, I just want to state that I don't understand why it's inherent that there should be an insufficient infrastructure and resources for democratic participation. Democratic participation is spurred or initially started from the people. It's not a top-down approach. It is a people or bottom-up approach. So I don't know why those two concepts seem to collide in Andy's proposal.
Can I address that?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think that it is inherent that people can't influence bigger districts, but I know that it's much easier for me to address, I'm not a Democrat. So like Jovani, I understand what it's like to be outside of the power structure in this city, but I don't understand why it is easier for me to address my state senator or my congressperson with the problems I have than it is with my council person, because my council person is more scared that I could mobilize 100 or 500 of my neighbors in order to hold them accountable, whereas my congressperson could care less if I mobilize 100 or 500 people. They're just going to ignore me entirely.
All right, Lawrence, you're up next.
Yeah, I think that part of the idea of the current arrangement is that even if your current council person is not responsive to your mobilization, there are other council people who may be more responsive. I just had a problem today where I was helping someone and I had to push them to Odette Ramos. And if Odette has a bigger district, they're less responsive. Also, I think it's interesting, people talk about the county. When people get to the county, look what they're doing in Baltimore County. They want to expand their council because they only have one Black person and no women. So one thing they say is, I miss the representation I had back when I was in the city. And I think that's demonstrative of Andy's point.
All right, Jovani, you're up.
I mean, why did they move to the county? Is the first. But I agreed with Andy talking about the democratic or civic engagement and participation. And I think, even this question has, my last two ballot issues have demanded more civic engagement than I think we've seen in a long time in Baltimore City, particularly surrounding ballot issues. But when you ask the question, why aren't people voting? It's because the people that are in there now at the current structure aren't responsive.
Thank you. Okay, the floor is now open to the general audience. So you may raise your hands and add additional points as you wish. And panelists included. So if any panelist wants to add any more, you raise your hand and say so. All right, Andy.
Yeah, I want to share some appreciation at Jovani raising these questions and getting them on the ballot, because I do think that we need to have stronger civic engagement about ballot questions, and I do think that we need to build those democratic muscles so that when a bad ballot question like question H is put in front of us, we can defeat it. I oftentimes think that the ballot questions rely on the fact that most of them pass once they get on the ballot, and I think once we win this in November and change that notion, it's going to be an entirely different concept of civic engagement around ballot questions. And I appreciate Jovani putting it on the ballot so we have the opportunity to show that we can stand up to bad policy on the ballot.
All right, I'm going to do something here, which is in our principle of more voices, and go to Quignardo next before you, Zac, just because you had a chance to do that, and we'll come right back to you.
Good evening, and thank you for taking my question. This panel is great. I love what you guys and ladies are saying. I want to say to this question that first, it was a question about Baltimore County districts. Baltimore County is growing faster and larger than Baltimore City. So it makes sense why their numbers are growing in their council. Second, what I've noticed is Baltimore City, and this goes to constituent services. Smaller districts create more silos. The larger the district, we have the law of large numbers, which means that more diverse people are being heard, and the money that's concentrated in those smaller silo districts, i.e. District 3, they're a small district, but they're more impactful because they have more money. If we spread that district out, then more people will be able to benefit from that money that's in these districts. That's just my thought on constituent services. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Zac.
Hey, thanks to Quignardo's point. You know, I think that, and Jovani alluded to it briefly, the idea that larger districts may help break silos and may help focus on legislation over constituent services is, I think, a totally valid point to bring up in an important conversation. What DC does is they have 8 districts and 4 at-large seats, but that's not something that's been discussed at all, and that's not the purpose behind this effort. And so that's a different conversation that would yield different solutions. And to Jovani's point, just super quick, Jovani, if you can find someone who moved to the county and you ask why they moved and they say, because there were too many city council members in Baltimore City, I will buy you and them lunch.
Well, I mean, that's not what they're going to say. They're going to say as the effectiveness of the districts, right? I mean, we're addressing the structure of government here, and there's a lot of elements to that. So, you know, I appreciate the point, and I think those are good quips to have, but let's be real. I mean, people are going to the county for lower taxes, better schools, the roads are paved, and the trash picked up on time. All the things that the city council can have oversight on over the executive branch of our government now, but they don't.
All right, Lawrence.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about the reality. The county is actually shrinking in size. And when a lot of people get to the county because they've imbibed the racist narratives about the city's inefficiencies, they realize the exact same inefficiencies are in the county. I went to the county and I commuted an hour and 30 minutes every day to go to City College because it was a better school. So the reality is there are things that you may not be hearing about, like the work we're doing with the Community Reparations and Repair Fund, that it's necessary for us to have City Council engage in that work to keep it democratically accountable. I think what we have is the disparity in terms of the good news being siloed and the bad news being magnified. No one's saying the status quo is perfect, but the reality is, again, what is this going to do to solve those problems?
And I want to mention we've got 1 minute left.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so again, I want to say there are 2 types of reforms and 2 types of disruption and shakeup. There are realigning reforms and there are insulating reforms, and this is an insulating reform. No matter how much disruption or shakeup language anybody uses about it, it's going to consolidate power into the hands of a couple of people who can better tap into the donor networks. And it's not going to do anything to fix the roads, it's not going to do anything to fix the schools, and it's not going to do anything to fix how responsive your council person is. Those require democratic engagement, and if we don't build up those democracy muscles first, this doesn't help.
All right, Adam, do we have time for one more?
Yes, one more.
Go for it, Jay.
Well, I think that's an assumption that was made by Andy, that reducing the size of the city council is going to not fundamentally change how the city operates. Obviously, we've been working with a lot of city council members, and this would change that. So it's easy to say that that nothing's going to change, but this might be that we bring in the people in a smaller number of people to allow things to actually happen instead of constant conflict and things not getting done. That might change.
All right. So, Adam, time's up.
Indeed. Yes.
We are ready for a vote. So the vote is for position 2. Where it is right now, but it's going to be multiple choice. You can put this wherever you think it should go. And remind you again that you can vote for multiple positions at the same time. So if you're good with positions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, put as many votes as you wish. And here are our results. So strong listing for position number 2. So it will stay at position number 2. Okay, we are moving on to Lois next.
Okay, well, my statement was that the problem is that people in diverse communities in Baltimore City, and that's diverse in income and ethnicity and everything, in Baltimore City may not get the help they need from their council person and city government to solve their problems. And council persons now represent about 41,600 people. Opponents argue that having to represent 73,000 or more people would make it more difficult to be as responsive to constituent needs. And they're also effective council persons are also responsible for exercising oversight of city government and enacting legislation to solve problems. And I'm submitting that with a smaller district, it helps them to do both jobs. But they also help respond to emergencies in their district, and they attend community meetings. And ideally, city agencies should be responsive to citizens' needs, but it seems like in reality, you do need this extra pressure. And I would add too about it costing more to campaign in a larger district, and that with public funding available now, that makes it more possible to use that form of funding.
All right. Thank you. And what position would you like to put your problem in?
Say 3.
3, right after Andy's and before Evie's. All right. Then we are going to go to Zac first and then Evie.
No, I think this is about, I think it's about right. I think that's even with the current size of the council districts, right? The 11th district includes most of Upton and includes most of Bolton Hill. And it's structurally going to be really hard to consider Upton with the same care that you consider Bolton Hill. And it's going to be doubly hard when the 11th district goes from Curtis Bay to North Avenue. So I think this is a real concern, a very important concern here.
Thank you, Zac. And we're on to Evie and then Lawrence.
Yes, thank you. I would think, or I'm thinking that a smaller council would allow for or encourage a broader outreach. That way, the communities or the council members they would be forced to reach with all the constituents in their district, not just choosing on certain areas who can, I guess, fund them, for lack of better words.
Okay, thank you. Lawrence and then Jovani.
I'd like to believe that's true, but understanding the reality of politics, I think unfortunately what we're going to see if we have bigger districts is we're going to see fiefdoms divided within districts that represent the old districts and people who have juice in one part of the district beefing with the other part of the district. So I'm really concerned about a Hunger Games scenario in these primaries that's going to make it worse for everybody in the district. I also think that Baltimore is rapidly diversifying. The Latinx population is increasing rapidly. And I think bigger districts would increase interracial strife where people are trying to pull the Latinx vote against the Black vote. And I think we're just setting ourselves up for really contentious politics with these bigger, more expensive districts.
Thank you. Jovani, then Andy.
Well, I guess I'm trying to better understand how what's written here versus what Lois said, because I was just kind of confused. I guess both ways. It's like people in diverse communities in Baltimore City may not get the help they need from their council person and city government to solve their problems. But it sounded like she was saying that the diversity in a bigger district is a net positive. So I guess I need clarity on that.
Oh, do you want me to answer that?
Yes,
I was just saying that, that a smaller district just helps different voices be heard. And then if you have larger districts, it might be harder to get the councilman to help you.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, can I guess respond now?
We do have one more left for Andy, and then you can come in back behind that.
Gotcha.
Go for it, Andy.
I think we have a really good example to look at about how big districts don't work, and that is our United States congressional district. The United States Congress has very large districts, and they're way too big. They haven't grown as the population has grown, and they are not at all responsive to the interest of people. There's a very good study that came out a couple of years ago that said the priorities that people have are not at all the priorities that Congress have, and they're in big enough districts that they're insulated from a few people coming and raising hell and pushing them to change their priorities, and so they fulfill the priorities of their donors and of their party, and that is not what we want.
All right, we're gonna go back to Jovani, and then we'll go to Jay.
Yeah, so when we're hearing this, I guess, kind of argument of diversity in communities or lack of representation, it's almost as if everyone in the community has to be in lockstep and think a certain way. And we talked about civic engagement being critical to some of these discussions. And I think we have to be okay with disagreement, and that's how we all get better. So to say that everyone has to kind of be on the same page and think the same way is I think is not a benefit. That's creating more silos.
All right, Jay, you're up next, and then Lawrence.
I think it's important to understand that by eliminating utilizing constituent services through a mass number of different locations and regional actions, what you're doing is you're putting the onus on the city to actually have to make changes to actually fundamentally solve the problems that are only being solved by using squeaky wheels of constituent services in regional, people who've been elected in their council member. And I think this is really important. There's a book somebody's read called The Goal. We can talk about it.
All right, Lawrence, and then Andy.
Yeah, I keep hearing about efficiency in constituent services. The reality is that efficiency in the service of elites is not good efficiency, and there's no world where the city council will remove itself from constituent services. The only question is which arrangement creates more democratic accountability. Smaller districts are messy. Loud people have to have their voices heard. I think that's good, because the alternative is you have people whose interests are more aligned with capital, more aligned with people with more juice, and then that's able to create the illusion of unanimity. So I think Jovani's point, I agree with him. I just think bigger districts create more of a echo chamber, because you only have to pay attention to voices that resonate with what you want to do or what your donors want you to do.
Okay, Andy. You're on mute again.
I wanted to go back to what I said at the beginning, which is that this could actually make the problem worse. I agree, Jovani, that we need a diversity of opinions. Like you, I'm not a Democrat, and that means finding the ability to get what I want out of my city council or my city government is very difficult. But I think that gets all that harder for minoritarian voices who don't align with the political party and don't vote in the primary in a world in which the district is bigger. It's not great now, but that doesn't mean it can't get worse. And I think this proposal makes it harder for you and I and anybody else who's not have access to their council person right now to have access and to have their voice heard.
All right. Thank you. Not seeing any other hands right now. I'll give it just a moment if there are any more thoughts. Otherwise, we'll move on to a vote. All right, so let's go ahead and have our vote on Lois's problem statement here. So she put it in position 3. So you can vote on position 3. You can move it up if you wish to 2. You can move it down to 4. You can put it wherever you want to do it. And don't forget, you can vote for multiple spots. And here are the results. So position 3 does get the most number of votes, evenly split between 2, 4, and 6 after that. All right, thank you, Lois. We are now going to move on to Zac.
All right. Thanks, everybody. You know what? I just think that there's a couple of arguments that have been made tonight. I haven't heard this before at all. And I think it's kind of post facto arguments. But arguing about this like legislation over constituent services thing. And so I'm gonna kind of not talk about what I had prepared and talk about this thing specifically. And so this is gonna throw everything up, and I apologize. On one hand, it is actually really hard to argue that constituent services are less important than legislation to someone who just had a sewage backup in their basement. And those type, like, we all can imagine very real constituent services thing. We all can imagine petty constituent services things, right? Neither of those things are hard to do. But I actually really applaud you guys for bringing that up as a concern. Because, and I see Jay made a point here, and I mean it's spot on. There are major structural things that have to be tackled. And look, I just beat an incumbent who had more money than any council member in the history of the city had, and who ran his entire persona for 10 years based off of I do constituent services, to the point of having said, look, I don't do, like I've heard him say before I was running, I don't do legislation, right? And we can't have that. And it's convenient for, incumbents to maybe hide behind that I do constituent services, because guess what? Challengers can't really do constituent services because they're not the council member. And so I I feel like that's a really important thing to bring up is that legislation is we are city council members are legislators. We have to legislate. We've got major problems in the city that we need to address. You guys are just shifting the constituent services to elites like this. I don't see how going from 14 to 8 helps the situation at all. But I agree with the problem.
All right, so Zac, do you want to put up a different position statement? Do you want to keep this one and move it around? What would you like to do with your problem statements?
And can we just delete mine?
Sure.
We can just have fine, right? 5, that's okay.
Sure can.
And I would be, if we could just kind of spend the next, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes, whatever time we have, be curious to see what people think about this balance, and it's a really tough one, of legislation and constituent services.
All right, I'm gonna write that down just for our remembering balance of, would you say constituent services?
Yeah, and transformative legislation.
All right, I'll fix the spelling on that in just a minute. Legislation. Okay. So after Zac in the list is Evie. You go first, and then Lawrence.
I'm trying to understand, Zac, when you were explaining the constituent services versus legislation and that you have to make laws. I just want a little bit of more clarity on what you were saying. I'm just not, and then you deleted your statement. So
Yeah. So having constituent services is the house next to mine is vacant, do something about it, or abandoned. And legislation is taxing the abandoned property at a higher rate so that you have fewer of them. As an example, right? You're talking about structural things versus specific issues.
All right. Lawrence is up next, then Jovani.
Yeah, Zach, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about Baltimore's system and how it relates to this question. Baltimore's a strong mayor system. So the mayor has incredible power when it comes to the agencies that do constituent services. I think the argument Jovani's trying to present is that fewer council people means that the executive would have to stop slacking and step up on constituent services. I think what we're hearing is that many of us believe it works the other way around, is that you have to be able to have a point of contact with the executive that is accountable. I'm sorry, that you can leverage and hurt, and that's more likely in a smaller council scenario. So if you talk a little bit about that arrangement, I think that'll clarify some things.
Go for it, Zac.
That's a great question that I will hopefully be able to answer better in 6 months once I've been in office for a little bit. Yeah, how does a strong mayor system sort of put the onus of being a legislative or constituent services, like an ombudsman type body? I don't know. Good question. I'm sure it's important, Lawrence. I don't have an answer.
All right, Jovani, you're up, and then Andy.
Well, I find it fascinating. You guys are kind of like proving the point I'm trying to get through here. Is that, again, that I agree with this statement, but I would like to add that in the strong mayor system, our legislative department does have the ability of oversight and power of oversight. And many of the board members aren't there without council approval. A lot of the funding, council approves the budget. So there's a lot of power that council does have to hold the executive branch accountable.
All right, we're going to go into Andy and then Lois.
Can I briefly respond to that? I think that sounds about right. And I also don't see how going from 14 to 8 changes the calculus there.
All right. Andy.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is a really good point about the strong mayor system, about the way that the council is forced to do constituent services instead of legislating. And I don't think that this is a solution to that problem. I hope once this election is over, we can get the same group of folks together and have a conversation about how we solve that problem via a charter amendment that would take away the strong mayor system, that would empower the council to legislate, that would empower the council to have oversight. But I don't think this is the solution to that problem, and I don't think you'll hear anybody tonight make a compelling argument for why it is.
Yeah, I Andy's spot on. It's great to have these discussions. It's super limiting to have it 2 weeks before the election. And I think that question H is also definitely not part of the solutions to any of the problems being posed.
All right, Lois.
Well, I guess I would agree that I don't think having a smaller council would solve the problem, but I do agree that there should be a balance between, trying to do transformative legislation and to reform city government, and you still have to do the constituent services. And I don't think having a smaller council would help.
All right. Jay, you're up next, and then Lawrence.
So the state government doesn't have, they have some regional operations, but if you have an issue with the state, you contact the state, okay? And utilizing constituent services through an expensive regional contact actually is a structural failure. It means that the system isn't working. So all we do is utilize somebody that we've kind of given money to on a local regional basis. And I, as a business owner, I've had to do this. And when I didn't give them money, I didn't get any services. So I found that like the only way I could get, my local, it had nothing to do with the ability of the city to do anything. It was all about who I had donated money to. And I think that is a strategy for failure.
And Jay, like if you're saying crony capitalism is really bad and we have too much of that, then like no counter argument. But if you're saying that having fewer touch points to communicate your concerns to is somehow better for this, you lose me. So
because we're using them to solve the problems when we should be designing our systems to interact directly with the city itself. By doing this through constituent services, what you're doing is you can have an ombudsman, and by the way, they're not expensive, and you can have a bunch of them, and they don't have to have a whole bunch of people that they don't need to do anything more than answer the phones. But instead, we have these people who you have to donate to, and they've raised money, and we don't need 14 of them in a shrinking city that's not working, that can't pay its bills already. You realize how much of Baltimore City's being utilized by the 2% taxes that we contribute? It's not even 50%. Most of it comes from the state and the federal government.
All right, Lawrence,
Correct.
then Andy.
I mentioned we're down to 1 minute.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so in the world of fewer council people, the only outcome is you have to write a bigger check to those council people to get the services you need. I think this is a critical nexus question. So elected representatives are the city. There is no division, at least in most people's minds. So having a conduit to the city that I can get my friends together and leverage in an election means they're more accountable to me. In the alternative world, if I'm doing a big development, if I want to build a giant apartment block and it's a sewage backup, whose sewage backup is going to get dealt with first? The person with the larger check from the bigger development, or the community association dealing with the abandoned homes in their community? This is a critical nexus question, and having those touch points, less council people is less accountability for the executive branch that we all agree needs more accountability.
All right, in the spirit of more voices, and apologies to Andy, I'd like to go to Andrew if you would still like to make a statement or ask a question. I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, just quickly, I was gonna add that I think a lot of the problems being brought up here, I agree are problems. I think that the issue is that isn't the problem being addressed by this ballot question. I think there are ballot questions and initiatives, and I would welcome people that want to address these questions working on this in the future, that can address a lot of these problems, like how, like, if we're going to shift constituent services into the mayor's office and all of this, we should probably do something to like actually codify that, as opposed to let's just shrink the council and hope it works out, because that's not what this question is going to do.
All right, thank you for chiming in, Andrew. All right, so we are going to have to move on. We're at the end of our time box here. So we're going to vote. I actually like your problem statement here, Zac, about the balance of constituent service and transformative legislation. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just keep it on there and have a vote, but it's your choice. You may withdraw.
Sure. It's ZAC, by the way, just ZAC.
Oh.
But yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Oh, sorry. No H in there. Gotcha. Sorry about that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and put up the voting for here. You may certainly give people a choice of where to put it, but I'm curious to see where everybody puts this. the balance of constituent services and transformative legislation compared to the other problems on this board. What position would you put this problem? All right, so here are the results. It's actually a tie between people who want it in position 1, people who want it in 3, and people who want it in 4. So I will put it to Zac first as the proposer. You get to choose between those 3. Which one do you want?
I think 3 feels pretty good.
3 sounds good. All right, I'm going to move this up to 3. Okay. That's one of the things I like about this process is we call it the ratatouille principle. You never know where a good idea is going to come from. And a lot of people thought this was a good idea, and we didn't know it was going to be here when we started. All right, we are up to Evie, our last panelist presentation of the evening.
Okay, thank you. So my support for question H is based on cost benefit, if you will, also relative to the size of the city council and the size of Baltimore City. Since we have had declining population, not to mention that the original intent for our city council members were to work as part-time members. And so that the way I see it is that they have a part-time service to the constituents, but they also have what I call real life experiences by way of having another job or whatever other endeavor to sustain their livelihoods, like most Baltimoreans also do, where we have, again, what I call real people, real lives in real time. So that's my main support for question H. I think that out of the discussions that we've had so far, I wrote down some keywords that at least that I've been hearing is that we are basing our maybe lack of support, and we're all free to support or not support, but we're basing our lack of support on fear that we won't have something, when ultimately we the people should have more of our own resources to work for our interests and the interests that we find important to our lives and our families and our needs. That's number one. The balance between constituent services and legislation or legislative services, I think, to me, at least hearing it right now, I think that's it's not necessarily a real play, if you will. It's not a real idea or real issue to me, because I think ultimately that having more city council people make more laws actually works against people coming up with the creative solutions that they can have for their own lives. Constituent services may not need to be over or inundated with the calls that it receives if people had more of their own resources to care for the needs that they have.
All right, thank you, Evie. So our first response is Lawrence.
So I think that a bigger district means people are more likely to need to work full time. So I guess I'm struggling to figure that out. Also, I know in the current part-time reality, they have to work other jobs. Those jobs are going to influence their decisions in terms of their political limitations because they could get fired. And I will also say that, again, we're doing things like the Community Reinvestment Fund. Those are going to control where the money goes from cannabis taxation. They're appointed by the city council. We're doing effective legislating in the council as it is because the districts are small and we have pull over them. So I think that we've ignored the legislation that's currently happening because we're so locked into a constituent services framework. We're not seeing a smaller council as a tool to legislation and the grassroots community empowerment that you want.
Can I respond to that?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. So, and to your point, Lawrence, about having to work full time, I get that. Most Baltimoreans most probably do work full time or do need to work full time. I don't believe or agree with having to pay full time for city council members who then legislate against the interests that I, as a taxpayer, as a homeowner, as a constituent, need the same resources that I need, but they get to legislate it away from me, for me to pay for them to have a full time salary. So I guess that's where I would disagree.
All right, Jovani's up next, and then Andy.
I just agree. I just agree with Evie's position here.
All right, then we'll go to Andy and then Lois.
I just, as with several other points on this, I do not understand how slashing the city council to 8 instead of 14 solves the problem that Evie lays out. I agree with you, Evie, that the way that the government works right now is not always legislating in my interest. I don't think it's legislating in the interest of my neighbors. And I don't understand how cutting the number of council folks helps that problem. And maybe it does, but I haven't heard an argument that explains how having 8 people instead of 14 addresses the problem that you've identified.
We're going to go to Lois next, but I realized that I forgot to ask Evie for a position. Do you want to move this problem statement up or down?
Is it at number 5, or that's just a list that because we've been talking?
It is at number 5 currently.
Okay. I'll leave it there and see where it lands for now.
All right. Go for it, Lois. You are up next, and then we'll go to Zac.
My only question is, I just can't understand how having people work part-time would be more effective in terms of what we, whether we get good or bad legislation, the way it affects people.
Oh, can I respond to that?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Lois, you said something, whether we get good or bad. So the fact that we are paying for full-time salaries and at least half the time we're getting bad legislation also, to me, lends to my point that why should we pay for that?
All right, Zac, and then we'll go to the audience.
Guess I would suggest that we reword the Evie's prioritized problem as council members should be more part-time and connected to their community and less professional elected officials.
Okay, I can try that.
And last, what was how'd you end that, Zac?
Professional elected officials, part-time versus professional being the.
All right. Okay, so you're good with that, Evie.
I can live with that for now. Yes.
All right. Is that are you suggesting that as a replacement for all of that, or the second half of this? And really, it's up to you, Evie. So, do you want to take your full statement, or do you want to keep a portion of this and add that in?
For simplicity and for time, we can replace it.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, panelists. We are now going into the audience, and Quignardo has his hand up. Go for it.
All right. So I think this was spot on, the question, the original question, and the retooling of it. I think what question 8 shows is that people are dissatisfied with the effectiveness of the entire city council. One of the things that I see personally is that the more you're connected, the more you get things through, even in a small district. So we need to find a way that's going to bridge this gap between helping everyone in the district than helping the donors or those that are very connected into their district. And I think reducing the city council provides a way of people expressing their opinion, regardless if it's right or wrong. They're just frustrated. And this is what people are voting for. People are emotional voters. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I think is missing in this entire form, is that we're looking at the mechanics versus the emotional side of it.
All right. I see, Zac, if you may get more voices, we'll go to Andrew and then come back to you. So Andrew,
I think it's you.
Yep, and if you were talking, you're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just gonna ask a question of for the proponents of question H, because it would save money. Can anyone give me a ballpark figure of how much money? Like, I don't even need like an accurate. I just need to know, like, if you're gonna argue it, is there a ballpark number of how much it would actually save?
Upwards of $2 million.
Every year.
All right, Zac.
All right. I think that if you wanted more part-time, less professional elected officials who are more connected to their community, and you were thinking about the size of the council, I feel like the answer would be to increase the size of the council, not to decrease the size of the council. This seems to be counterproductive to that.
All right. Not seeing any more hands at this point. So we can
Who
move
pays
on
for
to a
that?
vote unless there's somebody who wants to.
Yeah, Zach, who pays for that?
Doc, is that Jovani?
So who pays for that? If we increase the council, who pays for it?
Well, if you go part-time, if you go more part-time than it's already currently part-time, then you could keep the amount constant, I guess is kind of what the situation would be.
If it helps in the clarification, I think what I'm hearing is they reduce the salary per council member, but you would increase the number of council members is just the general thought.
And with
Right.
that, we've got 1 minute.
All right, Jay is up next.
Well, I mean, you could reduce the size of the council and increase the number of ombudsmen, who would be the two per council. That would give them and save money and give two people dedicated time to solve any constituent issue, which my guess is you probably would need only, I don't know, maybe we have people who are going to be part of the council that could tell us this, but I'm going to guess you only need 4. Okay, I bet you could use 4 or 5 of them. You cover all the issues that people are having in this city, and maybe it'd be a little bit more, but in the end, you'd save a ton of money and you'd solve all the constituent services, and they could help together identify where the issues are and help the actual governor or the mayor solve the problem so that you don't need them anymore.
All right, Andy.
All of this fantasy government that Jay is offering sounds wonderful, but it is not on the ballot this November. What is on the ballot this November is a question to slash the size of the city council from 14 to 8 without providing any of those extra insurance or extra layers of protection that Jay thinks would be good, but are not being implemented by the council right now. And my guess is that the council is not listening to Jay, so we're not going to get any of that stuff.
Lawrence.
Oh, that
It
is
seems
actually
like folks want to have it both ways. Either we save money by cutting the city council, or we invest in more staff. So you can't do both. I would argue again, no one wants to talk to a staffer. Even if they're an ombudsman, what power do they have? Why do I have to care about them? And these folks aren't elected. We have problems with our elected city council person. You want to have full-time, non-elected ombudsman, and you think that would be better? I'm just having a hard time tracking here. And once again, we have people want to punish the city council for their perceived betrayal, but we have a media environment where if the city council were doing good, would you know? We have an all-time low in murders. We have $8 billion of money being planned to be invested in the city. Do you want a city council more susceptible to big money or less susceptible to big money in that environment? Well, because the murders are down, people are seeing Baltimore as a good investment. And the murders are down in part because we have a big council that's been able to act responsibly to invest in community to do that sort of work. So again, I've been against city council plenty of times, but people are emotional in their hatred of the city council. But we have no narrative or media about the democratic possibilities that a bigger council actually provides.
All right. It is time for a vote. So this is in position 5, but again, you can vote for whichever position that you wish. So we are voting on Evie's here for council members being more part-time, connected to the community, and less professional elected officials. So in relationship to any of the other ones up here, you can move it up or down. You can leave it in position 5. And you can vote for multiple positions if you would be happy to have it in any of these positions. Okay, here are our results. So it did stay at position 5. I'll go ahead and we'll leave that there. All right, so now we are time to move on to our closing statements. Thank you for all of our panelists. Thank you for everybody to participate. Thank you for our audience members to chime in and to give your thoughts about these various different issues that are coming up. I think we had a really good discussion and got a lot of good things out here and even some things we weren't expecting to do. That's what I love about this format. But we are here. This was prompted by Question H. And so the question here is, do you think question H will solve our list of prioritized problems? Or if you would vote no on question H, do you think question H will make our prioritized problems worse? So we're going to go through in the same order. So I'll call out the names again, going through the panelists. And just tell me, would you propose that people vote yes or no, and why? And according to our prioritized list of problems. And you have 1 minute each. And I'll put the problems up here to talk. So our first person is Lawrence.
Thank you. No, question H will not address the priorities as we have announced them. I don't think anyone's talked about the idea that it costs more money to run the bigger district. No one's talked about who's funded this campaign. We have someone who does not live in the city, who is a noted Trump supporter, who is tied to big business in this city. And when someone puts all this money, and it's not to claim that anyone's there's a legitimate frustration people have, but you have to look at why the people backing it are backing it. They're not backing it to address anything we put here. They're backing it because they believe the arrangement of power suits their interests better. We have to democratically mobilize, point two, to be able to get this council as it is to meet our interests. No one's saying it's perfect as is, but I will not allow my emotions and my affect be manufactured by a media machine designed to drive interests that are not mine or my communities.
Thank you, Lawrence. Jovani, you are up next.
Well, I'd like to again appreciate everybody here for the discussion. And just I do think civic engagement is important. But I'd like to remind people, 25,000 people signed the ballot petition to express this frustration with their city council. And quite frankly, that's many more votes than most of these councilmen get combined in many of these districts around the city. So there is a major frustration here. And again, Baltimore is a $4 billion corporation. And I believe that people need to be the ones that say, hey, we want our council to be refocused and redirected on the job and the task at hand. And I do believe slimming down the council, redirecting the focus onto actual positive policy to affect the broader base of our constituency is a net benefit to the constituency of Baltimore.
All right. Thank you, Jovani. Andy, you're up next, and then Lois.
All right, I want to end where I started. This is an insulating reform that protects the status quo power structure. It does not disrupt it. It does not realign it. It does not change it. It consolidates power to a few people who are less likely to challenge the system and more likely to take money from the kind of people who funded this initiative, like David Smith. It also consolidates power outside of people who run on public financing, which is a thing that we should be supporting if we want to talk about what the people have. Look, I think the people who are proponents of this are trying to have it both ways. They're trying to tell you how good the government of Baltimore City will run after we shrink the city council and how bad it runs right now. But we need to be expected for it to run the same way that it is running right now, with less check of people on it and less check of minoritarian views on it. Vote no on question 8. It's bad for you, it's bad for your neighborhood, and it's bad for Baltimore. And I hope we can have this kind of conversation after it loses about the best ways to change the structure of the government to address these prioritized problems.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Up next is Lois and then Zac.
Oh, am I next?
You are next.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I just wanted to emphasize that the League of Women Voters of Baltimore City didn't take a position on this particular issue, but just we do have positions like we support public funding of elections and trying to reduce the effect of money in politics, and also, encouraging education about government and how to affect it and participation in government. And I think that the smaller districts that we have now would help on those particular positions.
All right. Thank you, Lois. Up next is Zac and then Evie.
All right. Yeah, so I think there are a lot of like interesting thoughts and ideas and concerns and problems that were brought up tonight. And only one of them is logically or would even reasonably be assumed to be addressed by reducing the number of council members, and that's the point of saving money. some sort of like efficiency in government thing. But that's only $2.5 million out of a $4.5 billion with a B dollar budget. If you want to find a more efficient Baltimore City government, there's like an infinite number of better ways to do this. Nothing else that was talked about tonight is an effective way to, this is an effective tool to go about solving that problem. And once again, great that we're having this conversation. Hope we have it again after this ballot measure loses. I'm voting no on question H.
All right, thank you, Zac. And we are going to go to Evie.
Yes, thank you. Of course, I'm going to advocate that Baltimoreans vote for or to support question H. And my premise has to remain the same, to reduce the size proportionate to the size of Baltimore City, and that more taxpayers, more Baltimoreans will have more of their money to solve their own problems, not put their problems or the expectation that their problems will be vested in an elected official solving their problems for them. I think people are more creative, they're more innovative, and people have a direct correlated interest to improve their lives themselves, particularly when they have their own resources to do so. So that is my advocacy, to vote for and to support question H. Thank you for this panel. This was the first time for me, and so it was a new process, but we should have more of these conversations.
All right, thank you. PJ, sending it back over to you.
Awesome. And I'd like to just take a moment to thank our panelists for a really wonderful debate tonight, a really great discussion. We are past our time, so I don't want to take too much of it more here. Thank you for everybody's participation tonight. I think what we've found is that this is a complicated issue. On the ballot this year is a yes/no answer that we all have to decide on. We hope that this kind of process, this type of discussion with diverse thinking will help to empower all of you as you go into the voting box or voting early. Please continue to look for diverse thinking as you look at these complex issues. We appreciate everybody's time tonight, and we hope to meet again soon. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.